Hyeseung Song. I am a first-generation Korean-American artist and the author of Docile, Memoirs of a Not-So-Perfect Asian Girl. Docile is a classic Künstlerroman, a story about an artist coming to be. It starts in Texas, where I am a Korean-American immigrant, the eldest daughter of a beautiful but domineering mother, and a father who brought us to a new country in pursuit of what he calls big money. It's a story about my finding visibility in the culture through academic achievement, heading to the Ivy League, ignoring the call of art long enough to develop mental illness, and ultimately losing everything of any external worth in order to find redemption in art. Docile is the Asian girl interrupted.
One of my favorite questions to ask is, do you have a favorite scene right now in your book? Like, is there just a scene that you're like, I like reading that I out loud when I go to readings, or I really enjoyed writing that, or felt like, sometimes you get that like hum when you write a passage and you're like,
Yeah.
I got that one.
Oh yeah. I 100% understand the hum, the thrum, the hum, the bliss. Yes. I would say I have a few scenes that I remember that I return to either through wanting to read them in a public space, or just that feel very resonant with me given where I am. And I think one of the scenes is this chapter early on where we go to my family when I'm young. We go to see my dad at his factory slash junkyard in West Houston, and the scene ends with um, this really tender image of my father. And I think I characterize him as a Vulcan in the darkness, because he's sort of this person that has that I feel very familiar with, but then because I'm seeing him in his own environment where he's making his own business. It's an aluminum smelting business where he ends up putting a lot of junk and scrap metal that are high in aluminum content. He puts them into a furnace and smelts them down and makes aluminum ingots, and then sells the aluminum ingots at a wholesale price. Every time I read that scene, I think back to, it's like one of the first scenes I wrote when I was writing Docile when I was 21 or 22. No, I probably was 21, and I'm 46 now, and the book came out when I was, I just turned 46 this summer. That scene I wrote in the creative writing department in my first workshop with the author Jeffrey Eugenides, who wrote Virgin Suicides and won Pulitzer for Middlesex. And he was really young at the time. That was, I think, his first teaching gig right after Virgin Suicides had come out. And he was really one of the cool professors. And it was just really, I remember getting a lot of great feedback from the workshop with that scene, but I remember also feeling like that scene was very different from what the other students were writing at the time. Like everybody was sort of really leaning forwards and writing work that was, I mean, I don't know if this was true, but like work that I felt like was very different from maybe their lives, very imaginative. And then my work, I was writing really from what I knew very directly. So it feels like reading that, I'm transported to that time. I can smell the smells of the junkyard. I feel the heat of the furnace. It's a very vestigial scene. And then another scene, I will say, like, I wrote much later, maybe in my early 40s, about a time that I was at Harvard where I was really, really struggling. And it's another time that I feel like when I read, I can feel like the sun on my face. I can feel the breeze on my shoulder. And it's this time when I had just come out of McLean Psychiatric Hospital, and I was 25 and had gotten this diagnosis, and I was trying to go back because the diagnosis didn't seem very serious. I was trying to go back to school, but like looking outside, if you were a bystander and you looked at me, I looked like the college brochure. I was on this beautiful, beautiful bridge. I'm the token Asian kid on the college brochure. Harvard's in the background. There's a, um, a rowboat of rowers, going underneath the bridge. It just looks so filmic, such a great photo that somebody would want to take and put on like the college brochure for Harvard. But I think internally, the internal reality was very different. Like I was struggling, I didn't know what to do. I knew what I looked like to everybody else, but it didn't resonate with where I was at the time. So those two scenes I think a lot about.
Feel like I can feel the sun in that scene too. It's very visceral, very real. And your dad's businesses, we have really different lives, but I I can so relate to that. I feel like I don't know if it's just an always thing or if it's like a 1990s, 1980s thing where like dads have a million side businesses or are just trying to like make it big in some way
Yeah.
that's not super traditional or something. Like I feel like that's something I hear about more than I like see in media, And one of my favorite of your dad's side businesses was like the underwear business, and I think you said that one of the underwear said like this is the fun or something like that. My son used to say that all the time. When he liked things, he would say this is the fun. When I read that, I was like dying. Like that's the best. It's the best line.
There was a lot of pages, a lot of words for these businesses. I had written a lot because there were so many. I mean, there was we had a rental space in a small warehouse in like some place in maybe North Houston where we would go on Saturdays and Sundays and sell this stuff to basically people who are immigrants like us, like Black and brown people. And it was just, just a bunch of really like crappy things in this big warehouse. But this is where people who worked really hard Monday through Friday, they would come on the weekends with their family and spend a little money to buy this stuff. And but there was so many things like that and stories like that in the book originally. But like when I sold the book, I think I'm embarrassed to say, I think the book was like 100,000 words, maybe like 110,000 words. It was really long. And we can talk about this later if you want, but it was just like how to whittle down this really long book to what it is now, which is I think I don't know 68, 70,000 words or something that was more manageable and like in line with um commercial expectations of what a memoir is today in terms of length. But I remember a lot of my darlings, my stories were really about my dad. I mean, I could have probably written an entire memoir just about all the things that my dad had done in his life to pursue what he called big money.
Yeah, and I think that I remember in your event at Third Place Books when you were kind of talking about, just writing your dad versus writing your mom and just the ease of writing your dad and putting your mom. And that's something that I can really relate to. I think it's so interesting because, I come from like a really sort of feminist view, but I still have a very difficult time cherishing my mom's stories and, putting them in things sometimes. I don't want to
Yeah.
give her credit. I want to give my dad credit. And I'm interested in what your thoughts are about that, especially since you worked for so many years on the book. It seems like that might have changed over time.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I certainly understand being a woman and I mean, I'm not a mom, but I look at the things that my mother did for us. And even when I am like, okay, she did a lot, it's there's an asterisk to it. It's sort of like, but it was, why did she have to do it this way? Or why did she have to remind us of the sacrifices? It's sort of um it feels more complex complex. Whereas like if I look at my dad and the things he gave us, it seems more delineated and simplistic. The calculus isn't calculus, it's just arithmetic. But I think, yeah, like with my dad, it feels complicated right now because as you know, my father passed away right after the book came out. And when I think about how I wrote him, like this goes to the ethics and the experience of writing about other people when they have experienced the same, you know, family life and experiences as you have. But with my father, I feel like I had this understanding. I was trying to understand him. And when I came back from Korea, when I had taken a year off from Princeton. I came back to America and had just lived in Korea for a year, and I wanted to understand my identity, my racial identity, and also sort of more where I fit into my family. Like I felt like my dad had done a lot of the calling of the shots. He had like really established sort of the infrastructure of our lives. And so I went to the page and I went towards writing to understand him. And I think I thought I had this not pat answer, but I had an answer, you know. But then I think when someone dies, and you look back at what you thought was the answer, certain emphases are different, certain um complexities you flattened, and that becomes like more three-dimensional again. And right now my father is the most three-dimensional he's ever been, and it's just very ironic to me to experience him in that way, even in that, given that he is, you know, now gone. I think sometimes writing with curiosity, I thought I was capturing all of this complexity and dimensionality with my father, but you know, that's sort of, I think, what happens when you write a memoir. The memoir is encapsulates a wisdom that you have at the time that the book is being written slash being published. And you as a memoirist, you expect later on you might have different assessments about the wisdom of your book, the observations and the answers of your book, or even not even answers, just the way that you formulated the questions of your book. But I didn't realize that that kind of collapsing of time would happen so quickly, and that, you know, I expected, oh, well, I'll have the wisdom of a 50-year-old or the wisdom of a 60-year-old, the wisdom of a 70-year-old when I come back to Docile in those years and reread and rethink what I wrote. But all that happened so much more quickly than I had expected, because my father passed away so soon after the book, and that has been an incredible surprise of my life. It's just astonishing to me that that could happen, because obviously I thought I was really, really exploring, and of course I was, but death just is just a mind fuck. It just does these things and changes so much in a short period of time, especially unexpected death. My dad died, you know, unexpectedly. So, and I'm still, I mean, Asha, you're getting me in a place of like still processing. So, these are the thoughts that are happening in my mind at this time, but maybe later on, who knows, I'll have different things will crystallize.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that you're bringing that up, because I feel that, you know, most people don't think a whole lot about how temporary our memories are and our truths are. You know, they just change so fast no matter what. And I
Yes.
think that the people who are aware of that often just talk about how we rewrite our memories based on like the neurology. But I think that circumstances also change it. And I think that's a really good point. I think so. My dad died when I was 15, so I have like a whole thing about dead fathers and and death, and like the way that, you know, it feels to me like there's just this space that still contains them, but it's a space that like follows you around and kind of changes as time passes, you know? Like it's just like it's not quite a
Mm.
haunting, but it's just like the outline of who they are, were, could have been, just kind of stays with you. And that I find to be like one of the most interesting things about life. It's just the way that these people who were with us and such a massive part of our lives just remain in such strange and unexpected ways. So I think that, you know, what you're saying is really important and good to think about when you're writing a memoir. And I'm really sorry that happened. It super sucks.
I I appreciate that, but as you were speaking, I just tears are welling up in my eyes because I think the words you're using, outline and container, um, those are really powerful words to me as a visual artist. Like I am thinking about how my any relationship is sort of dynamic, psychodynamic, and the way that I understood my dad is sort of outlined in the negative and positive spaces of me next to my father. And how does he still persist in time as a person because I am persisting in time right now here, and the container that I made, like it's very hard. I think my father had a lot of difficulties with this book, which he did not read before he died. He said, he kept telling me, like, I'll read the book in 7 or 8 years. I'll read it in 7, 8 years. And I was like, why 7? First of all, I was laughing because I was thinking, why 7 or 8 years? Where are you getting the 7 or 8? Very specific range of time. I mean, he was just a funny guy in that way. And then I think he also very painful to me. I think he thought of himself as the villain of the book. And of course there is no villain in the book. If there is a villain, it's probably me. I'm the person who I'm sharing everything about. So maybe some people would read into the things I share and say like she's the bad person. But my father, I think, had a very redemptive arc as a character in the book. And so I I think my father had a lot of shame that he carried around as a Korean man who grew up in the 60s and the 70s and then came to America in the 80s. And then, you know, and then here was his daughter with the great memory who made a container for his shame and then showed everybody. It's very, I think it was very hard for him, but he was trying his best to really support me and be proud, while it was very painful for him to perceive himself as a villain in the story that was made available to lots of people, strangers and friends and family. So those words that you're using, they really resonate with me, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing. I think that this is profoundly important. I don't think that I've ever been a part of a conversation that is so aware of the impact that memoir can have. I think we often talk about, you know, ethics in writing about people in a different way. It's more like how are they going to react? Um, but I think you know, trying to understand that holistic experience of his life and what it must be like to have a child write your life, you know, is so important and really caring. And it's sad that he didn't get to read it because it is a really beautiful portrayal of him. Like I like your dad throughout the book. Um, and I, you know, I think that somehow he's a lot like my dad.
I think that that generation, our father's generation, they probably had an understanding of memoir as just maybe autobiography or like the greatest hits parade of the family or bullet points, like sort of like a press release of the family. And of course, that is not what memoir is, right? We know now where we're in the heyday of memoir, and memoir itself, the mission of memoir has changed even in the last 20 years. But I think my dad someone actually said something very, very kind to me and told me that they thought the book was a really three-dimensional portrayal of my father, and that is the only kind of tribute that you can really make to your father. I mean, I obviously, like, now I think about tribute in such a different way. Like, I'm trying to form a tribute for my father who is now gone, so of course I want to only highlight these wonderful things about my dad, but actually a real tribute is to show the father or the individual, as a real person with dimensionality. And she said, this person said, you really did that. And I think that's the best tribute you can delineate for your father. And that was very, very kind. But it's interesting, when I started writing in the creative writing department at Princeton, you could either be a poet or you could be a fiction writer. And I applied in fiction because, I think I told you this before, I was trying to write in prose. But over the course of the past 20 years, now we have so much more understanding of all of the kind of different genres that we can work in writing. And one of them is, creative nonfiction, memoir. So that's been wonderful that now we're, thanks to people like you, readers are more sophisticated about what they can read, and understanding what the genre of memoir can actually accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. And that is a really wonderful thing to say about the tribute. I think too, like the benefit of memoir is that, and I wonder what you think about this. This is just like my view. So my dad actually started his memoir right before he died. It was like on a little note, and he was a cocaine smuggler for the Pablo Escobar's cartel for like 20 years before I was born. And so he
Oh my
like named
gosh.
his memoir Dealer. And it's
That's
like,
a great title. That is a great title.
I know
Oh my God.
I have it on my wall, and it's really funny. It's like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. This was the life I chose. And it's all misspelled and shit. And
That's
that's really all he
amazing.
wrote. It's like this long, there's like one more sentence or something. Um, but I think that, if I were to write a novel about my dad and my life, and I would have to cut out everything that actually happened because nobody would believe it. It's just
Yeah.
too wild. And
Yeah.
I was thinking a little bit about that when I was reading your book, because I was thinking, this stuff about all the little side jobs, I think that's so realistic, but I can imagine that people who maybe come from a different class or background or whatever would just be like, oh, nobody would do it that many times. Nobody would have that weird of little side jobs. And memoir is so wonderful because you can't, I mean, you shouldn't lie or make it up. So it's just the most, if anything, you cut it down, you make it more bare than it really is.
Oh my God, I was gonna say the same thing. More of it's an act of omission, because you have to, it's about emphasis. It's about what details you pick and choose, because you can't, I mean, this book is from 0 to the age of maybe like 39 in 270, 290 pages. And so you can't give space to everything, right? I mean, my dad was doing very nutty things later on in his life too. Like and none of that made it into the book. And and yeah, I mean, it's like you have to pick and choose the things that you want to talk about, for sure. But yeah.
Are there any like scenes that you cut that you just really treasure that you sort of like miss?
Yeah. Um, it's funny because I was telling you it used to be like 110, 120,000 words. And then it was like the first time I delivered to my editor, I think I had gotten it down to 100. And so in the end, getting to like 60, 68, 70,000 words, like that was really me taking out a lot of like little stories, like I said, about the businesses, but also, shaving off on the level, which was great. But a lot of funny things, I think, that weren't super relevant. Like there were these different characters that I think added a little bit more levity to the book, because the book, I mean, I hate this word, but people say, you know, the book is heavy because there's like mental health stuff in the book. But you know, there were I think the book was a little funnier when I delivered it. There was an inspector in Baltimore, because you know, in the Baltimore section, which is like one of the last sections of the book, we have, like, my husband and I are going into this house that is just kind of like, you know, we're talking about over the top, you can't make this stuff up type of house, just a disaster. And there's an inspector who comes in, he's hysterical. I thought he was hysterical. I think he, you know, just one of those minor characters that I went into length to describe. And it was because there was him, and the backdrop was this, you know, horror house. But I think my editor was right. She sort of was like, you know, maybe we should take out some of these descriptions, and that was an easy place to take those things out. There was a lot of funny spots. Like I think Korea, the chapter in Korea where I go as a bootstrapping measure, my parents send me there as a bootstrapping measure because I was having a lot of mental health struggles at Princeton. And there's a lot of funny things that I like, funny observations that I have moving back to my home country where I really thought I belonged. And some of that stuff we kept, but a lot of it was taken out for sure.
That makes sense. I find it to be quite funny. And I also think that um I think that your prose uh so I have a theory that people who are visual artists write differently. Like and I have like nothing to back this
Oh
up.
my God. Tell me your theory. I am so interested. Okay.
It's like, you know how when you read a memoir by a poet, it's different.
Yes, totally.
I think that visual artists have something similar but different from poets. Like I think that we write in visual ways. Even if we're
Yeah.
not writing scene, I think that we make language into a visual experience. And that I think translates even to hearing it out loud. It's just the way that stories are made becomes a visual experience. And whether it's based on like the rhythm and you know, just the cadence of the words. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm like developing this thing because when I was reading your book, you know, I had seen some of your stuff about art, but it didn't like track to me that you were so much of like such an established visual artist, which is amazing. Congratulations on all your awesome stuff. And your paintings are beautiful. But then like as I was reading it, I was like, this is so familiar. Like, what is it? And you know,
Mm.
I often kind of just like fall back on John. Is it Berger or Berger? I've heard it said both ways lately, but just, you know, his books, not even just ways of seeing, but so many of his books that combine, you know, the visual aspect and writing. And I just feel like there's something special about that way of writing, and it lightens the book. It's like if you see a painting about something awful, even like a Francis Bacon painting, it's not heavy necessarily. It's art. Like it just brings it into the space where you can just pick the painting up and walk away with it. And I think there's something about that keeps the book from being heavy even when the parts are really impactful. It's more just authentic and beautiful. It's just a beautifully told story of something
That's so
hard.
interesting. I took a workshop with Sophia Stefanovic at Catapult before Catapult stopped their workshops. And I remember she was one of the first people who read any of the manuscript. She was just like, this work is really filmic. And I had heard a lot of people characterize Docile as cinematic. But the most interesting thing is like hearing questions from my artist friends, because they're like, oh, you wrote a book, okay. And then they read the book, and like one of my friends, Kristen Kuntz, who's a painter, she was like, you know what it's like reading a page turner, but then all of a sudden, like the action, which has been going really fast, it stops, and then there's like this static scene where that is sort of like a verbal translation of your paintings. And it's like, oh, here's a scene, and then it's like action, 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 scene, action, 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 scene. And that's probably, I mean, I loved that characterization. I have to think about if that makes sense, but I definitely had places where I was like, oh, I'm going to go straight in for this description and I'm just going to stay here for a little bit, and really enjoyed that writing.
Yeah, we often talk about craft in very different ways. And I love that. I love the visual aspect of writing. And I just love it when painters write and artists, visual artists in general, people who make art with
Yeah.
hands.
I think that's wonderful to think about, and I'm gonna go back to my drawing board and sort of think about visual artists who are writing, because there's so like a big trend. You see a groundswell of poets who are writing their own memoirs, and on the line level, it's just, so sumptuous and rich.
Mhm.
Everything that I've read from these poets who are writing memoirs, but it would be interesting. It's funny that you talk about craft, because like the first iteration of Docile I wrote as a memoir and essays, and that didn't work out for me. And what was really helpful, I mean, it took a long time to kind of discover and be able to see through all of the words and text what structure the story was actually demanding. But I ended up writing writing the memoir and essays, and then putting it aside for a while, and then coming back to the manuscript and realizing it wanted to be sort of more novelistic, a classic Künstlerroman, which is, like, I think it's kind of a category of Bildungsroman, like a coming of age story, but a Künstlerroman is like a coming of age story for an artist coming to be. And it really is this classic, like lots of things are happening. There's lots of characters, like it's moving at a brisk pace. So I was like, okay, this is the structure that the story is demanding, because I remember reading the first iteration of the book and realizing that it didn't reflect back to me the reading experience of actually the way that the lived experience felt. So while I was writing that second manuscript, revising that manuscript into sort of more of a novelistic structure, what was really helpful was, because we're talking about cinematic, filmic memoirs, I wrote and I read this screenplay writing book, and they talked about what's called a beat sheet, which is basically an outline. It's sort of an
Mhm.
outline in progress. So I diagrammed every scene and what I wanted to get out of the scene in the memoir. Looking at, are you're looking at me and you're like,
Yeah.
you're really happy. Are you an outliner yourself? Because
I
this was so helpful to me.
Yeah, and I just well, so like I work with a production company and like that we make plays and we make movies and I feel like I did the same thing. I wrote my book a long time ago and then I just rewrote
Okay.
it with like as if it's a movie with a beat sheet. I just love it. I love using these techniques that are so cinematic and helpful and it's just wonderful. It's so much easier than outlining like the other way, the writer way. Like if you use the screenplay techniques, wonderful. So it's so awesome. Makes me very happy.
I mean, I did literally one page,
Yeah.
whereas like I remember I went into Scrivener and had this like really long, crazy outline. I had put flashcards and I was like doing the flashcards. I did so many different things, but at the end, it was good to have that sort of that first attempt at what it was going to look like, but then have the beat sheet and be like very faithful to the beat sheet and going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So anyways, yeah, you're right. Using these techniques from different kind of writing genres is very
You know,
helpful.
when I'm reading your book, I think a lot about existential capitalism. And I mean, I just generally think a lot about existential capitalism because I think that it is this really interesting battery that we often don't explore in the ways that it's actually, happening to us and
Mm,
motivating us. And I'm just really interested because, a lot of memoirs are really redemptive. They're sort of like a making it big, certainly celebrity memoirs, how I met
yes,
big.
right,
And,
right.
there has to be a beginning, middle, and end to the story. And I think for me, one of the challenges in like writing memoir and enjoying memoir is like I don't want the Jesus narrative, but
Yes.
I also do want a story. So I think
Right.
like yours is so great because to me it is this unpacking of existential capitalism in story instead of it's like this resistance to like what happens when you resist existential capitalism, with the variables of like your life and your Korean family and stuff. But and then become an artist. Like that's the solution presented, and like the
Right.
best solution ever. It's so thrilling to me that and I don't know that I've read a memoir that goes there. I mean, I've certainly read memoirs that are like, and then I became a writer, but
Right. There's
this
so
one,
many of those. Yes.
yeah.
Yes. I love that you're bringing this up. I think, and I appreciate that you appreciate the solution presented because, there's a lot of talking about, um, poverty math in the book and the idea of the model minority myth of like this idea that you can toggle between a scarcity mindset and the apparent opposite of a scarcity mindset, i.e. abundance, which is this idea that you have infinite resources, infinite external achievement, infinite love, infinite all of these things, but you know that the opposite of poverty and scarcity really isn't abundance, it's actually just getting off of that line of toggling altogether and understanding that it's enoughness. Like a lot of people ask me like, well, the book's kind of, covers a lot of ground. Why didn't you end with the scene of you marrying your astrophysicist um, husband? Or why didn't you end with, you are an artist in New York City and you did your debut in the gallery. Why didn't you end there? But if you if I had stopped writing there, then it's sort of what you had talked about earlier. It's the same arc of the celebrity memoir where you end at a high note and there's victory, right? But the idea is that it's not, I didn't want to portray abundance. I wanted to write to the point of having lost everything. I've lost my mother, my career, my husband, my mental stability,
Mhm.
and I only have myself. And I have reached and written to the point of enoughness and nothing else. It's interesting because my agent, when he read sort of the final draft of the book before it went to print, he said, he used this word precarious to describe the ending. And it's funny because in a novel, I imagine if this book were a novel, if I had decided to write it as fiction, I might have had pressure to write only one hospitalization. There's like 3 hospitalizations in the book
Mhm.
because there's a story within the mental health story itself of diagnoses and misdiagnoses of the model minority myth entering an environment and medical environment and influencing the actors there and sort of the solution of culturally competent care comes much later. But in terms of existential capitalism, like you and the poverty math, the idea is to write to the point of precariousness. Like there's not just one hospitalization where I get there, I get the right diagnosis,
Mhm.
I'm cured and I leave and I'm I never have problems ever again. I mean, there's a hospitalization in the last chapter of the book. It's trying to show that we are all works in progress. We are all, like, life is precarious. To me, that is the unsexy truth about life that I'm trying to express in the book, that we are all, like, nothing is guaranteed, and we all try hard, but especially with mental health, like, that is something that is chronic, that I keep on top of and manage. I mean, I really think of it as managing every single day. So this victorious arc where you're steadily climbing and end on a high note. You're absolutely right. That seems very dishonest to me, and I would not have been able to get there. And for everybody who's asking, wow, this is a really sort of long memoir in terms of how many years it covers. It covers exactly what it needed to cover and no more. Like, I had to get to a place where it was very, very bad. And then, I mean, I think the beautiful redemptive, if there is a victorious moment, is actually like assigned to my father. And this is to come full circle back to our conversation about dads. Like, my father is the one in the end who is able to recast a lot of things for me.
As I started my way in the world again, this time singular and a satellite moving alone in space, a monad, not a dyad, slowly painting again and supporting myself in my new alone life, I still felt the most comfortable and seen when I was uncategorizable, when I deflected labels and saw myself as made up of many aspects, like a shiny mosaic, visible to some people at one angle and to others at another, when no one but me could calculate my worth. Whenever I was at a loss in the studio, I cleared the easel and made a self-portrait. There were so many I painted. Me with the blood-red horizon in the background. Me in a small square, defiant. At some point in the course of making the portrait, I looked into the mirror so long I could no longer recognize the genetics, history, culture, and place that made me me. I was simply lines and shapes, light and darkness, like anyone else. The human categorizations fell away, jawline sneakily square. The eyes the writers of so many books have lazily described as almond-shaped, though they look nothing like the nut. The black hair that once a girl in Texas asked to touch to see how dry and coarse. And for a second, my fundamental self, the thing that didn't need things and existed already full and whole inside, came into focus. Happiness needs a quest. And in that quest to become visible and matter to others, I had lost appearing and mattering to myself. In my life, I had tried to be a great daughter, a great student, a great wife, an American, a Korean, even a great artist. And through these pursuits, I had always chased an ought, forgetting to revel in what I actually already was.